Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vedic Astrology podcast. My name is Fiona Marks. I'm happy to welcome you back today for our episode, Reconsidering Retrograde, and getting into the nitty-gritty of Cheshta in Vedic Astrology. This forms part of topic 3 for me, the techniques and knowledge of Vedic astrology. And it all starts with the kind of armchair astrology that I'm sure, like me, you find unavoidable as soon as someone starts sharing their life experience. And from this, we'll revisit how to calculate Shadbala and then how Shadbala shows up for each of the planets. But for now, sit back, relax as we catch up on some storytelling. Recently, I joined a new group and it meets every fortnight. And during the 4 or 5 times that I've gone, a member of the group has been sharing her experience of not feeling her normal connection to the flow of life. She's someone who normally feels a strong sense of being on her path, knowing where she's going. I guess it's a sense of purpose, a sense of connectedness. And over several meetings, every time I saw her, she shared this same experience, which it can be quite distressing when one's used to being in that flow. It can, feel lost or disorientated and not knowing what you can possibly do to get that flow back. And then the last time that we got together, suddenly this person was at ease. She was back in her groove, back in the zone. And after sharing what that felt like and her joy, comfort of being back in her flow, she shared a story of an annoying run of communication and connection problems that she'd been experiencing. It all began several weeks earlier when she had decided to disconnect her TV receiver box in order to have more peace in her home, so that room that we sit in wouldn't actually be a TV room. It would be a bit of a sanctuary. And then around the similar time, I think her main computer, the computer that she has, had died. And it turned out that one of her grandsons was about to get a new computer. So it just seemed obvious that she would get the old one, and the family cleaned up this laptop, deleted everything, installed everything, tested it. It was all new to her, ready to go. She pressed the on button, and of course, sure enough, the computer didn't work. No matter what the family did, couldn't be revived. But not to fear, one of her other children's children was also in the market for a new computer. Seemed like the perfect excuse to trade the existing computer for a new one and give the existing one to grandma. Same arrangement was made. And of course, same thing happened. Dead computer, couldn't be revived. Fine, my friend says, all I really need is maybe the radio just to check in with the news now and then. And I'm sure I've got one of those old radio cassette players somewhere around. And she searches for it, finds it, plugs it in. And of course, as you guessed, the radio had died. It wouldn't work. Now, if you're anything like me, of course, you hear a story like that, you can't help but think Mercury retrograde, right? It's the classic tale of Mercury retrograde. And by the way, this event, this series of events that we're describing, of course, did take place during Mercury's recent retrograde in Libra in 2021. But hear what happens next in the story. It's at this exact moment when she's 1 TV box down, 3 dead computers, and now an ever-reliable old radio even isn't working. This is when my friend finally surrenders to the silence in her home. And just like that, of course, she's back in the flow. So this story touched me greatly because it's so easy to label Mercury retrograde as responsible for all of our technology problems. But my friend's story really brought to my attention that perhaps Mercury was trying to achieve this connection that my friend so desperately wanted, this sense of flow all along. And this was Mercury's way of achieving it. So this is one of the big differences between modern Western astrology and Vedic astrology. Now, I'm not actually trained in Western astrology, but for me, in popular media, it seems as if Mercury retrograde is almost an urban myth. And it gives me the idea that all retrogrades are bad. And often if you start your session with a client and they look at their planets for the first time and they see one of them in the birth chart is retrograde, they're assuming this is obviously a bad sign. However, in Vedic astrology, retrograde actually gives high Cheshta Bala. And that is one of the balas, one of the strengths that contributes to the overall Shadbala or potency of the planet. And that's what we're going to be examining in today's podcast. Now, my friend's story highlights how Mercury retrograde is working in her chart. And we don't know what's in her chart. I have no idea what her birth time is. I don't even know when her birthday is. But this is what I think is so valuable about studying Vedic astrology. Not necessarily reading charts, but understanding the philosophy, understanding this very rich tapestry of how humans are all different and they're all the same. In fact, I remember telling Ryan in my final exam where we were studying, he's testing the reading of a chart, the reading of 2 case studies all about timing. And I said to him, I don't know that I would ever be someone who reads charts. And of course, now that's what I do for a living. And I have this book called God Loves Fun. And this is one of those examples of God Loves Fun. You say something like that, and God takes great pleasure in the enjoyment of me now reading charts for a living. But I guess what I was really trying to say to Ryan at that time was that I don't know that reading charts is what really attracted me to Vedic astrology. It was more the Vedic psychological theories and observations that I was interested in. A map of how humans work, a framework, a context, a Vedic framework context of how humans work. I'm very attracted to that. So you can imagine my delight when I think this happened sometime in my first year. I just happened to be listening to an old recording that Ryan had made about a lecture. And let's listen to what he has to say.
I have a book in mind, how to understand yourself without having to look at a chart. Because if you know how the planets work and you know you've got relationship problems and you know what's going to make a good Venus, meaning that someone has a bad Venus and they don't know why their relationship's working because they want to be selfish and take everything for themselves. They don't want to have fairness in the relationship. They don't want to be comforting to the other person. They don't want to think about the other person's needs. They don't want to bring their wife flowers on Friday. These sorts of things. If they don't know that Venus likes these things, that's why the relationship isn't working. And so you don't need to look at someone's chart to know that. You can ask them. Or you can know yourself. And so then if you know how the planet works, what you have to do is simply embody the more conscious aspect of that planet. So that's what I mean by benefiting from Vedic astrology without knowing how to read a chart. You just have to know what the energies are like. Because these are the energies of life, right? These are the energies of life. And there gets to be a point when you're studying astrology that you don't need this anymore. Because if you just talk to someone, you start getting a sense of, oh yeah, okay, this planet's probably in bad dignity, or this planet's getting starved. And then you can simply just give them advice based on what you need to work on developing that planet. So you just need to develop all of your planets and you won't worry about this anymore, right? I'm a bad salesman for astrology, aren't I?
I don't think I could add anything to that. I can completely identify with that desire to understand the self, regardless of looking at the chart. But meanwhile, if we come back to my friend, what if it was the case that Mercury retrograde was truly helping this person? Could all of those communication and connection problems that we associate with Mercury retrograde actually have been Mercury purposefully and consciously trying to connect my friend with Source? And isn't that truly Mercury's role? Mercury's not the internet and printer cartridges and mobile phones. but connection and communication with source, with our inner knowing, with our purpose. And could it be that the natal placement of this person's Mercury, maybe it was with low Digbala somewhere in her chart, or maybe the sign that Mercury is in the chart is being transited by many other planets, and you just can't hear her Mercury at the moment. So let's look at the true qualities of Mercury. It is a planet of communication. And with high Chesta, the person can ask for what they need. They can follow up on requesting what was agreed. We think of Mercury as boundaries, and communication keeps boundaries healthy when we call up or call out people who are breaking our fence or where the fence needs mending. So with high Chesta, we have the confidence to do that. And if we think of Mercury in the body, it's like the tubing in the body, isn't it? It's the myelin sheaths, it's the blood vessels. So it's not the flow, it's not the nerve signal, and it's not the blood that's in the blood vessels, but it's the channels that those vital signals, vital resources flow through. So Mercury connects flow with where it needs to go. And you could perhaps say that with high Chesta, Mercury, the project manager, has the confidence to disconnect and reconnect any wiring that is not in line with the project plan. Whereas with low Chesta, you can imagine that project manager walking around the building site, talking to all of the heads of department and taking on more and more tasks as their arms get more and more burdened with folders and diagrams and tubes and everything that needs to be done. And this low Cheshta Mercury, it doesn't prune out the tasks that are not important. It doesn't prioritize. It becomes more of a doormat or a passive receiver of tasks rather than a respected professional manager. So we might experience that those disruptions to our technology, they're actually reminding us that we're not connected. Those disruptions of technology may actually be for our own good. And maybe in my friend's case, the quality of Mercury in her birth chart needed a Mercury Chesta boost to follow through on what had been agreed. She had started the process herself by removing this TV box. But the high Chesta Mercury, maybe that was transiting, we know it was retrograde, helped her to follow through on that project plan. And I'll be interested how you experience Mercury retrograde transits when viewed through this lens. Is Mercury retrograde bringing you back to the simplicity of your connection with Source? Is it directing your flow by breaking distracting wiring and snapping you into the present? Is it drawing your attention to what is important in managing your life project? Is it following up on what you agreed to yourself, the agreements you made with yourself about how you would treat your time, your distractions, your tasks, your technology, your project? And if this is the case, what else is Cheshta doing? Let's revisit what Cheshta is and how it shows up differently for each planet. Cheshta means movement, gesture, action, and effort. In Vedic astrology, Cheshta relates to the movement or speed of the planet. For the planets of the solar system, it's calculated by looking at their relative speed from our perspective on Earth against their average speed from our perspective on Earth. It's as if we were to plot every night the movement of a planet, and sometimes we would see that there's big gaps each night between the movement as the planet seems to have moved faster, and that's when we give it low Cheshta. Whereas if we're plotting the movement of the planet each night and it's just making just a tiny movement each day, then it looks to us as if it's moving slower. And so we give it high Cheshta. And in our podcast where we compared the birth chart to a symphony score, we talked about how low Cheshta perhaps was the musician who races into his seat. He hasn't had time to practice. He hasn't had time to take care of his instrument. Whereas the high Cheshta musician is someone who's poised and calm, prepared because they've practiced, they've been maintaining their instrument with care diligently all of this time. Now, obviously for the sun and the moon, they don't go retrograde. We don't see them changing speed in that way. So for the sun, we use Ayana Bala, and we discussed that in episode 3 of this podcast. And for the moon, we use Pakshabala, which is a calculation that we need to make for Kalabala, which is another one of the 6 strengths. And this relates to fortnights. And loosely, we can think of it as relating to the waxing and waning of the moon. So let's just note here that I am describing these very complex astronomical measurements of Cheshta in a very relaxed and layperson way. So if you want to understand the calculations better, you could pay attention during Shadbala semester of the Asheville Vedic Astrology apprenticeship program that's on Teachable right now. You can consult Brihat Parashara Horasashtra, chapter 27, all about the evaluations of the strengths. You can look up some charts in your Vedic astrology software and begin to see the patterns of when planets receive more and less Cheshta. If you use Kala on that right-hand box that describes the placement of the planets, if you keep scrolling along the bottom scroll bar, you will see the percentages, the speed percentages there. So plenty of good things to look at. And you can scrub up your knowledge by consulting sites like NASA and Wikipedia. And I'm also linking the Institute for Astronomy in Hawaii into the show notes here, because they go into some of how we understand the astronomy of Cheshta. Now that we've revisited that Cheshta relates to the speed of the planet, the motion of the planet, let's begin to look at how that plays out in the birth chart. Cheshta shows how a person moves through the world with that particular planet. If the planet was a vehicle for a particular aspect of our consciousness, how does that planet navigate through its experiences? What is its quality of character? The slower a planet moves, the more powerful that quality becomes. You can think of the grace and poise and confidence of a master, or maybe of a dancer, of a ballerina, that Cheshta, high Cheshta, is graceful and very conscious gestures, that word that we have for Cheshta, very conscious gestures of where we put our hands and our feet and the tilt of our head. That's high Cheshta. Whereas contrast that with me, if I was trying to do some ballet move, I would be rushing and hoping that no one would notice my mistakes. And I certainly wouldn't be stretching out and holding my placements, my gestures. So that gives us an idea about Cheshta. To behave at its best, a planet needs a sufficient amount of Cheshta, and we're going to go into that a little bit later. Planets with low Cheshta don't move through a person's life with brilliance. They lack confidence and they may lack a positive intention. Cheshta reflects the innate ability to express that planet in its most confident form. So planets with high Cheshta are naturally a bigger part of the person's life. Whatever they are karakars for or rulers of tend to be more supported, they're more confident. How confident can a person feel with the nature of that planet? There's a kind of magnetism, a natural magnetism to high Chestabala. Whereas low Chestabala planets rarely get consciously used because typically a person doesn't have the confidence that the planet will work out for them, so they don't try. And that perpetuates a cycle of a sense of failure, which is a little bit self-defeating, isn't it? Because we never actually gain the confidence because we don't practice using that planet. Now, remember with Shadbala that we have family groups of planets. We have one group of the Sun, Jupiter, and Mercury. We have another group of Mars and Saturn, and a final group with the Moon and Venus. And if we think about how those planets are grouped, the Sun and Jupiter and Mercury are our planets of achieving our goals and purpose. They're visionary and they're manifesting. We've got Jupiter and Mercury, the manifesting planets there. So we have the vision, the sense of purpose to achieve in our life. That is the Sun, Jupiter, Mercury group. The Mars-Saturn group in Shadbala is all about overcoming, addressing the obstacles and problems, the delays, the hard things that get in the way of achieving our goals that the Sun, Jupiter, and Mercury are trying to do. We need these malefic planets who help us here on planet Earth to deal with the reality of how tough things are on planet Earth. Very important. And then the Moon and Venus group are about our receptivity. They are feminine planets. They've got that watery connection, the water element connection. So they help us flow through life, bring comfort and ease into life. And each of these planets require a different level of Chestabala to be sufficient. So for the Sun, Jupiter, Mercury group, they need 50 points out of 60 to be sufficient. A lot of Cheshtabala there. For Mars and Saturn, they need 40 points out of 60 to be sufficient. And for the Moon and Venus, we need 30 points out of 60. So it's interesting, isn't it, to reflect on that breakup and, you know, all things being equal, it seems as if it's easier to get the Cheshtabala we need for the Moon and Venus. I wonder why that is. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is that showing us that half the population has that chance to be receptive to love, and is that to promote us down the whole householder path that creates the legacy of children of our next generation? Is that part of the dynamic here on planet Earth? Is it that if it was easy for us to follow our goals for the Sun, Jupiter, and Mercury group, that there'd be a whole lot of selfish, egotistical people out there following their goals? I don't know. I look forward to your thoughts as to what that setup is, but it kind of makes me smile that the scales are a little bit weighted in favor of love and valuing the self here with the Moon and Venus. And let's look at Sun, Jupiter, Mercury with high Chestabala. They give us the confidence to pursue our goals and our purpose. The Sun with high Chestabala, it lets us stand out from the front and take a beating for our inspiration. And in that we inspire others. We become that beaming light like the lighthouse. It's the Chestabala, the strong Chestabala, that gives the Sun that. Similarly, a confident Jupiter has a rock-solid sense of purpose and faith, but it's never fanatical. In fact, it's wise, it's learning. It may even adapt as we learn and become even more wise in relation to our purpose and faith. And Mercury allows us to turn our vision and goals into a reality by following up on agreements, asking for what we want, keeping good boundaries, and directing the flow to the tasks that will achieve the goal. Mars and Saturn with high Chestabala give us the confidence to use our will to overcome obstacles and the resilience to face failure without fear. If we go after our goals that Jupiter, Mercury, and the Sun are outlining for us, we're definitely going to fail. Without doubt, at some point or many times, if we put ourselves out there, we're going to fail. And Saturn gives us the fortitude to survive the reality of failure and to keep going. And of course, Mars is that engineer and problem solver who is able to get us through obstacles by solving problems, taking action. And then Moon and Venus with high Chesta Bala, they help us value the self. The Moon allows us to love and accept the self, and therefore we can receive love from others. Venus with high Chesta Bala, we have an inner knowing of how worthy and deserving we are. We value the self and we look after and take pride in the self because of our innate knowledge of our own worth. Now, when we are low in Chesta Bala, in some ways, for all of the planets, if they're low in Chesta Bala, what it causes is for them to withdraw. When the Moon and Venus are low in Chesta Bala, we withdraw because we don't value the self. We don't love the self, and we don't think we're worth taking pride in. We don't think we're worth taking care of. And because of that, with the low Chesta Bala, no one else can give us love or we can't receive the care that other people have for us because we don't value the self. So we withdraw and we're not open. And the same thing with Mars and Saturn. We withdraw because we're afraid of failure or because the obstacles are too big. We're afraid, or we're afraid that we won't survive a failure. We can't risk the chance of a failure. And with Sun, Jupiter, and Mercury, we withdraw because we doubt ourselves. We doubt our right to be visionary, to be wise, and to have our agreements delivered. That self-doubt undermines all of that visionary goal-setting power that Chesta Bala was going to give us if it was high in Chesta Bala for those 3 planets. And I find it's really helpful reviewing and observing a client's Chesta Bala when you are preparing their chart. And it's helpful because it will tell you where the person lacks confidence and where they are most likely to withdraw. If your goal as an astrologer is to connect the person with their inner flow, their inner wisdom, their voice, just as the story that we shared at the start of this podcast outlined, then one wants to be mindful and careful with how one approaches a client's areas of lack of confidence. If we pay no regard to that as an astrologer, we are in danger of being ineffective by neglect. That is, by accidentally and with disregard, damaging the client's confidence and brightness. And if we do that, then there's little chance that the client is going to gain success from the session because they have withdrawn. They won't be able to hear the guidance that the session has to share. So I'd love to know your thoughts of how you use Chesta Bala in your readings. Do you also use it in your preparation to build rapport with a client and to sensitively treat those areas where we want to connect and help the person step into their confidence and show them how they can be more confident with their planets? And do you read charts when people are telling you stories? Are you building a chart in your mind, as I am, or as Ryan was suggesting earlier in the podcast? And do you actively, consciously use the high Chesta Bala transits in your own life? What do they teach you when the planets are transiting with their most confidence? For example, do you look at those high Venus transit times as times to look after the self, perhaps times to tidy the home and create that care in one's home environment and daily routines? Do you look at high Chesta-Bala Venus times or moon times for being open to love, for love transits? Do you look at high Chesta-Bala Saturn times for when you might get that extra boost to just do it anyway, to take a risk, to take an action that requires confidence? Do you plan those for your high Chesta-Bala transit times? And do you help your clients understand that retrograde on there when they look at their natal chart is nothing to be scared of? I look forward to hearing all of your thoughts. And until the next time that we get together on the Vedic Astrology podcast, I wish you good health, brightness, and confidence.